Disney Lorcana is releasing soon, which means it's time to look at the product you should get, specifically the starter decks. Hi everyone, this is Mushi Report, and I'm here to go through the 3 Disney Lorcana, the first chapter starter decks, which I feel all of them are pretty decent in terms of value, and you should get all 3 if possible. With that said, if you're low on budget and you can only get one, which one do you get? If you want the short answer, I highly recommend the Amber and Amethyst deck as a must buy of the 3. However, if you'd like to find out more about the 3 decks so that you can find out for yourself, let's dive in. First up, let's start off with the Amber Amethyst starter deck, and here is the list. The Amber Amethyst deck has one key focus in my opinion, which is card advantage. You have Maleficent Sorceress and friends on the other side to provide card draw. Have you heard about Pot of Greed for Yu-Gi-Oh? Well, friends on the other side is exactly that. Be Our Guest is also a nice song card that lets you dig through your deck for character cards that you want, while Part of Your World and Hades Lord of the Underworld are great cards that help you retrieve characters from your discard pile. Your ace in the deck will probably be Dr. Facilia, Agent Provocateur, which is a shift character so you can bring him out by turn 5, and he is a great character that literally ensures that you have an endless supply of characters. Just try not to use him for a challenge or questing, and you can freely use all your other characters for questing as much as you want, since they'll just return to your hand if they get banished. Overall, the deck plays out pretty well since it has so many card draw options and search methods, so you have a much easier time digging into your deck for cards that you need, then use all the cards that you have to take on your opponent's characters and eventually overwhelm your opponent by sheer card advantage. Definitely the best deck out of the 3 in terms of how playable it is. If you choose this deck, you want to focus on hanging on to your early game cards like Olaf and Pascal, which can give you early game advantage, and of course those Maleficent Sorcerers and friends on the other side to make sure you keep on drawing for answers, while your Magic Brew Mickey combination, Maximus and Rafiki all are there to help you handle your opponent's characters. Moving on, we have the Emerald Ruby starter deck. The Emerald and Ruby starter seems focused on combat and gaining control of the board, with lots of cards focused around combat such as Vicious Betrayer, Stolen Scimitar, Megara, all aim at giving you more strength to take on your opponent's characters, while cards like Cruella de Vil, Mother Knows Best and Dragonfire are all there to take on the characters that you cannot handle through challenges. There are many interesting cards in this deck that aim at disrupting the opponent's strategy. Apart from the board control cards that I mentioned earlier on, Iago and Jasper both stop your opponents from questing with characters, while Aladdin, Street Rat and Rapunzel even reduce your opponent's lore, slowing them down. The ace of this deck is most undoubtedly Aladdin Heroic Outlaw, since his ability lets you steal away 2 lore from your opponent, getting you closer to win while pulling your opponent away from it. There's even cards like Shield of Virtue and LeFou that help you to ready Aladdin Heroic Outlaw, so you can first quest with Aladdin for 2 lore, then after you ready Aladdin with those 2 cards, challenge a character and use his ability to gain another 2 lore. The deck strategy is clear, but I find that it has some conflicting cards. For example, you have Peter Pan and Pongo, most of which are evasive characters meant to just safely gain lore while your opponent can't hit them, which is kind of the opposite of the combat-oriented cards the deck has. Also, the deck has ways to ready your characters to challenge, but you only have one single Aladdin Heroic Outlaw that can make use of those cards properly. Adding in Steal from the Rich, which is an uninkable card that's only good in multiplayer, this deck can draw rather badly. If you're playing this deck, I'll focus on hanging on to all of your inkable cards when you mulligan, since there are tons of uninkable cards in this deck. You have some pretty decent mid-game plays like Captain, Rapunzel, Stitch and Aladdin, but you can only place those cards if you have at least 5 or 6 ink. So you should focus on keeping character cards, since there's a lot lesser character cards in this deck compared to the Amber Amethyst deck. Lastly, it's time to talk Sapphire and Steel. The Sapphire and Steel starter feels kind of like a mixed bag to me. On one hand, it has many of the early game cards to let you control the board early, with many plays like Captain Hook, Prince Eric with Challenger, and a bunch of Flounders and Goons to let you play in your first couple of turns, along with Hercules to be their bodyguard. On the other hand, One Jump Ahead, Grammatella, and Mickey Mouse Detective are all cards that can help you to gain ink quickly. So with ink in the inkwell, that lets you call upon your high cost characters like Mufasa, Simba Return King, and Maui. These high cost characters with their high amount of lore means that you can shake off those challenges while you focus on exerting for lore. In addition, you have Fire the Cannon, Smash, and Grab Your Sword to handle some of those problematic characters. Beast Hard-Headed even handles item cards, and even Aurora Dreaming Guardian gives all of your other characters wards, especially to protect your high ink cost characters from Dragonfire. The deck's ace is most probably Maui, the only 8 cost character in all 3 decks. Though ace or not, I'm still not a fan of his art, and in fact, any character above 5 cost can be considered an ace in this deck, since there's so many of them in this deck. You'll especially want to keep Maleficent uninvited and Mufasa around, since every time they quest, they give you 3 lore, making this deck really aggressive. Overall, I think this deck's early games cards are not really strong enough to help you control the board, especially since you have a pretty limited amount of ink to use at the very beginning. So I'll mulligan away the early game low cost cards and focus on keeping the cards that accelerate your ink count like Gramatella and Mickey Mouse Detective, along with the high cost characters, especially the high cost characters. Even though this deck has the most amount of high cost characters of the 3 starter decks, it's still not really easy to draw into them since the deck isn't optimized. So these are your 3 starter decks, their playstyles, and how you should play them. But which one should you get? Well, if you want to rate the decks in terms of playability, of course I rate the Amber Amethyst as the best deck, followed by Sapphire and Steel in second, then Ruby and Emerald as the least playable. In terms of value, it's harder to fix at the moment since we don't know the single card prices since it's, well, not yet released. But based on the rares and super rares though, I would still rate the Amber Amethyst as the best value, since cards like Part of Your World, Hades, and Dr. Fossilia look like great cards to use for their respective inks, and Mickey Mouse is, well, Mickey Mouse. Sapphire and Steel is next because Grab Your Sword, Maleficent Uninvited, and Aurora are all great cards to use for their inks, especially Grab Your Sword, which I expect to be used in every single Steel deck. The rares inside Emerald and Ruby are rated the lowest among the 3, simply because it includes Steal from the Rich, a card which I don't expect to see any play other than multiplayer events. That's not to say the deck is bad though, since Cruella and Aladdin are both still good cards that will see play for sure. With that said, you should buy the starter deck that you intend to build a constructed deck for in the future. Even if I think the Emerald and Ruby deck isn't great in terms of playability right out the box, you should definitely get it if you want to build an Emerald or Ruby deck in the future, since it includes multiple copies of useful uncommons like Mother Knows Best or Dragonfire. And that's it for my thoughts on the first chapter starter decks in terms of which you should get. So which starter decks are you planning to get? Let me know in the comments below. And hope you enjoyed this video. This is D Summon from Mushu Report, signing out.